Welcome to another episode of Rooted and Built. I am Amy Young, the Family Ministries Pastor at First Methodist of Enterprise. And in this podcast, we have been talking about the reliability of the Bible. We have already covered the existence of God and the problem of evil. And we've been talking about, can we reliably bank on the Bible being copied and preserved over a couple of thousands of years? Last episode and the episode before that, we compared the Bible to other ancient texts and saw that the Bible more than checks all the markers of the measures of historical documents and far surpasses ancient texts that are never questioned at all. And then we talked about a little bit the Dead Sea Scrolls and about how these shepherds who were looking for fertilizer found these containers of highly preserved manuscripts of the Old Testament, leading us to confirm that the copies of the Old Testament that we have today have been very reliably preserved for a couple of thousands of years. And we also talked about some reasons why people question the Gospels and explain those reasons as to not be legitimate when people are discussing whether the Gospels have actually been written and are reliable, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then I talked a whole lot last episode about this guy named Josephus. And I'm super excited about this because Josephus is not a believer. He was a Jew. And if you want to know a lot more about him, watch the previous episode. But he was a Jewish person who wrote a couple of articles mainly volumes, actually, entitled The Antiquities about Jewish history. And in that, he writes a paragraph about Jesus. And for us, that goes a long way in the reliability and the validity of the things that the gospel writers were expressing and writing down. Because this guy, who is not a Christian, took time out of and a portion of his writing to write a whole paragraph on what the belief is in his area of Jesus. And this guy is friends with some elite Jewish people who were present during the trials of Jesus and the execution of James, the half-brother of Jesus. So when Josephus writes these things about Jesus, again, it's only about 8 lines in a paragraph of volumes entitled The Antiquities. But when he writes this, he's not writing it from some Christian gossip or rumor mill or through the grapevine. He is hearing these beliefs from Jewish elites who were actually there when Jesus was on trial, who was actually there and even ordered the execution of James. And so he is hearing testimony from non-believers and also hearing from people who do believe when he writes this down, leading us to bank on the fact that Jesus did live, he did teach, he did perform miracles, and he did die on the cross. Not only that, but it was written by Josephus that it is believed to be true by Christians that Jesus rose from the dead. So I'm super excited about that. And again, why is this important? So why is it important that we spend so much time talking about 8 lines of script from a Jewish historian who did not believe in Jesus? Why is this important? Well, let me tell you. Because this paragraph is not only the earliest witness to Jesus outside of Christian tradition, meaning this, he is not a believer. He is a Jewish person who got bored while he's sitting in Rome and decided to write a history of the Jews. And the Antiquities is not the only thing that Josephus wrote. He wrote a few other documents as well. As he is sitting there, a Jewish person who's been excommunicated from the Jewish community because of his involvement with Rome. He is sitting there in Rome with nothing to do. So towards the end of his life, he starts to decide, I'm going to write a whole lot of things outside the Christian tradition. So again, this paragraph is not only the earliest witness to Jesus outside of the Christian tradition, but it is also an affirmation of Christian beliefs about Jesus regarding his messianic status, his resurrection, and prophecy fulfillment. So Josephus, a non-believer, writes 8 lines of script that solidifies or affirms that there are people in his community, in this area, that believe that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ, that believe that he fulfilled prophecies of the Old Testament, and that believe he rose from the dead. Even though Josephus didn't believe it himself, he wrote that down and made it known. So this paragraph is significant, is so significant that it's been called this, the Testimonium Flavianum. So this small section of this huge antiquities, it has its own little name, and it has been highly debated for many years because this is a non-believer who's basically testifying that people believe Jesus is the Christ. And so there are some people who think that a Christian scribe interpolated or inserted this paragraph into the works of Josephus. But there has been more research and more study done to show that the style of writing of Josephus is present all over this paragraph. And there's been some mistranslation of Josephus's writing such that he's not saying Jesus is the Christ. He's not saying Jesus did rise from the dead. He is not saying that these happened. What Josephus is saying is that there are people who believe that it happened. There are people who believe that Jesus is the Christ. Well, some of translations of Josephus make it seem like he is believing these things. And so there has been some new research to come out that has been done extensively on the writings of Josephus. And this guy, it's a book entitled Josephus and Jesus. I can't remember right now who wrote that, but I've been reading it and just poring over it because his research and his study shows that Josephus is not actually claiming these things to be true. The translation from the Greek to the English shows that he is saying there are people who think this is true. So this debate is coming to an end because of this recent studies that have been done on this. So what does the paragraph actually say? Again, it's 8 lines. It was originally written in Greek, which is also weird because Josephus was not super fluent in Greek. So a lot of people think that Josephus had somebody who is fluent in Greek helping him write these things and writing it down for him in some cases and helping him with some of the word order and things like that because Josephus's native language is not Greek. But he did write this in Greek. And when it was translated into English, this is how it reads. So Josephus writes this, "And in this time there was a certain Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was a doer of incredible deeds, of miracles, a teacher of men who received truisms with pleasure. And he brought over many from amongst the Jews and many from amongst the Greeks. He was thought to be the Christ." So I'm going to pause right here and say that there are some people who had younger manuscripts than some of the older manuscripts that have been found after the commentary on Josephus that mistranslated that portion right there. So there are some people who would translate it as that Josephus thought that Jesus was the Christ, or they translated as Jesus was the Christ. And so their conclusion was Josephus could not have written this because he was not a believer. In the rest of his writings, he says that he is not a believer of Christianity. But the proper translation and the oldest manuscripts that we have of the antiquities is better translated like this: Jesus was thought to be the Christ. Then it goes on to say this: "And when Pilate had condemned him to the cross at the accusation of the first men among us," or Jewish elites, right? "Those who at first were devoted to him did not cease to be so, for on the 3rd day it seemed to them that he was alive again." I'm going to pause right there again and say this, that earliest translations of this, the oldest translations of this get it wrong because they translate it as Jesus rose from the dead, which is something Josephus simply did not say. the manuscripts that are closest to the original writing of the Antiquities that Josephus wrote down is translated best by saying it seemed to them, it seemed to the followers of Jesus that he was alive again. Given that the divine prophets had spoken such things and thousands of other wonderful things about him. And up till now, the tribe of Christians who were named from him has not disappeared, which is a huge statement, meaning this: believers are not only still believing and following Jesus after his death and resurrection, but they are multiplying. That's what Josephus is writing here, that in the time that he is alive, in the time that he is writing this Antiquities about the history of his people, the Jews, in this time, the Christians still exist. They have not disappeared, is what he is testifying here, which is huge. Because if you remember anything about Paul, right? Paul had a mentor. And that mentor, before Paul became a follower of Jesus, before Paul had this experience on the road to Damascus, before he turned from persecuting Christians to being one, Paul was super against the way of Christ. He was super against it so much that he was involved in an intense persecution of Christians. And his mentor told him, "You need to chill out. Paul, you need to take a step back. You need to breathe a little bit. Because if this truly is heresy, if it truly is a falsehood, it will fade away and it will die out on its own. You won't have to do anything." And then he told Paul, if it's not, if it is real, it's going to last. And guess what? Josephus is literally saying that. He is literally saying that Christianity, that he don't even believe in, has survived past the death of Christ, and through his resurrection, the Christian movement has not disappeared. So this is evidence. This is evidence for us that shows that there are a large group of people who believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, and that he rose from the dead. Somebody who doesn't even believe is testifying to the existence of this belief. But like I said, where did Josephus get his information from? He had a network, a relationship with people who actually witnessed the trials of Jesus and who actually ordered the execution of James, the half-brother of Jesus. Remember, Josephus is not some random person deciding to write. He was one of the elites of society until he was a turncoat and started helping the Romans. So he had connections that would have known this belief firsthand of these people. So again, he's not drawing on Christian rumor or he's not drawing on grapevines. He is basing this on recollections of Jerusalem leaders that he personally knew. This is a huge fact that gives validity to the Gospels and strengthens their reliability. That Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John definitely recorded things that people believed because an outside source is telling us that people believed these things. So, external corroboration from other outside sources. That's one of the measures of authenticity that historians give to historical or ancient text. And we have that for the Gospels. We have that through Josephus, who did not even believe. The Bible has that. So, now that we have talked about the existence of God, now that we have discussed some theodicies of the existence of evil that can exist at the same time that a good and loving and all-powerful God exists, we've discussed that. Now that we have discussed the reliability of the Bible, that we can trust that it has been passed down reliably through a couple of thousand of years, that we have very close translations of these original manuscripts, which we're going to talk about translations next. And now that we have discussed this, though, we can start building a biblical worldview on the fact that God exists and that the scriptures we have in the 66 books of the Bible are reliable and legitimate. So because of that, we can start talking about translations of the Bible, which that's going to be in the next episode. How do we come to the translations that we have and which ones are best? We're gonna discuss those things next episode. And then after that, we're going to start building our biblical worldview. How do we view marriage and relationships? How do we view politics and finances? How do we view our friendships? And how do we view society as a whole in which decisions are made? How do we view those things according to the gospel, according to God's word? We're going to start building that over the next several episodes. So if you have not liked and subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. You can also make sure you get alerts for this podcast and other podcasts and other things that we have going on our YouTube. Make sure that you do that so that you will be notified when a new episode drops and you can just click it and watch it really quick. Because again, these things build on one another. And if you're not watching previous episodes, you might get lost in the conversation. So make sure you're doing that. And also, I highly encourage you to comment. Comment on the things that excite you as well, dealing with God's word and a biblical worldview. Comment on the different things that we are discussing here so that it can truly be a discussion, because we don't want this to be just a monologue. We want your input as well. Thank you for joining this episode. Again, like and subscribe so that you'll get notified. These episodes drop every single Friday, so make sure that you are tuned in to our YouTube as we continue to discuss biblical worldview.